Allow me to start by thanking AfCoDD for the invitation to take part at this important conference, which I must say, it is getting better and better each year. I couldn't go home without saying and appreciating the way this conference was organized, the discussions that took place. And the theme as well, reimagine, rethink, reorganize, and remobilize. I would add together for an African world order. The discussion around debt is a timely topic because its impact in the development of Africa, and it is visible that impact bluntly in the lives of the Africans. The lives of Africans are severely affected by the debt that Africa is owing to most creditors. And one question that we always ask ourselves is, why are we paying debt that when we are not able to see the benefits of that money that was borrowed? The money that has been borrowed by most African countries, it does not go to the purpose that was said to be for. If that was the case, then we wouldn't be having the problems we're having today, either the repayment or the benefits that our people would see today. The money that we are paying back, most of it ended up in the few pockets of few officials. Maybe to be more polite, I should say it was mismanaged. It's a gross word to say it was stolen. This calls for transparency on how the debts are contracted and how it is managed. The lack of transparency in these processes is the key to the problems that we're having today. If it was transparent, then everyone affected will be informed as to why we are paying this money to the creditors. I think we have a great opportunity at this moment with this conference and other discussions that took place over the last 3 days, that we can engage together and rethink and remobilize to how we should approach the debt management of Africa. Professor Opa, yesterday, he gave us an overview of the historical perspective of the debt in Africa. And I must add that one of the problems that we have is that we have to love Africa. We cannot make changes that we are talking about if we don't love Africa. Loving Africa, I mean producing Africa, consuming Africa, being proud of being African. This is a problem that calls for education of our young people. We always tend to look for UK, for America to go to school. I must admit, I was also one of those who benefited from that. But I will be happy to send my son to the University of Nairobi, of the University of Egerton, or any university here in Africa. We had a very interesting experience in Mozambique at Eduardo Mondlane University, where I teach. One of our students was from São Tomé and Príncipe. He is now the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament in São Tomé. And we engage with him and we speak the same African languages. So this is one aspect I would like to challenge ourselves. Let us make Africa the home for everything. The home for education, the home for entrepreneurship, the home for business, the home for everything. We are not aparting ourselves from the rest of the world, but we are calling our continent the main source of our happiness. I feel sorry having to buy tea from Kenya in London, having to buy coffee from Ethiopia in Brussels when I visit there, because I have no chance to buy coffee or tea from Kenya, from Ethiopia, in Mozambique. But it's easily available somewhere in Europe. So, dear colleagues, I represent APNAC. APNAC is the Africa Parliamentarian Network Against Corruption. This organization was established some 24 years ago with the aim of capacitating or building a commitment of African parliamentarians to fight against corruption, to build a platform for exchange of information, experience, initiatives that can enable the continent to fight corruption. And the issue of debt, it is also an issue that is related to corruption. Because if the money that is being borrowed from our creditors, as it was said in the various discussions we had in the room or in the plenary, in the parallel sessions, that the problem is not with the debt itself. Debt is not a problem. The problem is how this debt is contracted and how it is managed. But if everything is done well, there is no issue, we have no issue with that. The problem is that most of the money that is borrowed by African leaders, it's not intended for the purpose that the people are told. That money ends up on something else completely contrary to what has been intended for. The reason is that is the reason why we are not able to pay back. And we keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing because the money is not producing the money that we're expecting it to produce. So fighting corruption, it is one way of also controlling the way that money is being used in our continent. And we are very happy to say that AfCoDD and other organizations that are part of this network are working towards closing the gaps. We mentioned here about harmonizing policies and laws. It is very important because if one country is doing well, if the next one is not doing, we're not doing much for Africa. But if we can succeed in harmonizing our laws and policies, and if we can succeed in harmonizing our strategies and approaches, then we can say that we're closing the gaps that the creditors can use to take advantage of the African continent. It is a shame for Africa to borrow money from the poor. It was mentioned various times. Africa is the richest continent in the world, but it's borrowing money from the poorest countries in the world. It has been mentioned that France has no gold mine, but they have plenty of gold in their reserves. When I talk about loving Africa, it's a leader who loves Africa will never steal money to keep it in a bank in Swiss or in France. The leadership that we have that can steal money, that can steal gold and pack it and put it in the banks in the Western, those are not loving Africa. Loving Africa means doing the best for your continent. Loving Africa means doing everything at your power to the betterment of our continent. So I plead to all of us, fellow parliamentarians, let us embrace each other. Civil society, parliamentarians, let us work together. Because there is an issue also that I must point out. We should stop working in isolation. There was a lot of knowledge that was shared in this conference. And I must tell you, less than 10% of knowledge that is here in this room, less than 10% of parliamentarians across the continent, they don't have the amount of information that you have here. So you are sitting on a wealth of knowledge that is not being shared among our parliaments. So let us do something that in the next rounds, we also involve as many parliamentarians as we can. Because at the end of the day, those are the ones that have to bring the legislative solutions to some of the problems that we have addressed here. But if they are not informed, if they are not capacitated, they cannot appreciate the need to make it a priority legislating on specific issues that have been addressed here. Transparency is one of them. We have to enforce that our parliaments be transparent on how they are managing the public fund. We have to enforce that our parliaments let the people who are the owner of the money that we're managing know exactly how this is being managed. So I must end my brief remark by saying that it's not just a good thing to sit here and discuss about debt management. It is a duty. As members of parliament, as civil society organization, we are entrusted with this responsibility to make sure that the public funds is managed in an appropriate manner that benefits our people. We must demand that every cent that is acquired or is borrowed in the name of the people be accounted for. Accountability is a key issue. Transparency is fundamental for accountability, and if we can have a transparent processes, I believe we will be a step ahead from any maneuvers of those who pretend or intend to deviate the money that is borrowed for development for their own personal gain. I must thank here saying Aluta Continua.